I was just thinking how you'll notice amazing poetry in the commonplace world if you'll pay some attention to what you're listening to on the radio. For instance, if you'll use digital sampling technology, you'll be able to examine your saves more closely. Nature photography and recording is a great, nearly unlimited resource. That is to say, if your apartment rental has some wild nature around it, or on the property. Otherwise, it's hard to find nature you can sample without conflicts of interest. But many people photograph nature in public parks, any public land, such as boat landings, on rivers and lakes, and around libraries. At any rate, sampling technology can give you a lot of media you can work with. But you've got to keep your head up if you want to let your hair down. To paraphrase the song. For instance, when I start a written article, I might get a quick reintroduction to the weight of any timing issues. I picked up with this writing just as a storm to the southwest of here was starting to move over us. So, I experienced the weather from a unique perspective. Maybe this is partly what comes right along with higher ascent beings and this kind of conversation. You'll begin to think about the meanings and significance of so much in our lives, things that had always escaped you. This added layer of meanings must be taken into consideration from then on in all that one does and sees. I can't find a new attitude of gratitude, as well as in how it's good to be in a rainproof apartment with no leaks. There might be some freedom, as well, from flooding worries. So, every little association in your living will have to be taken into consideration. What fun, these blessings of spirit in the nature. For instance, you've got to take into consideration the risk of being someone's dinner at every step. But fun, I think, is still fun by anyone's measure. But imagine. At any rate, I do like how this writing is starting out, but I've got to get over to our office to get my medicines. So, and then, a quick dash through the rain to get my morning set right. If you think about it, some people in the world may be somewhat isolated in their lives. Who did you check in with today? For some people who do not get out much, no one. So, it might only be your word against theirs if there's in any local trouble. Heaven forbid that. But if there had been, if you had checked in at the doctor, or the clinic, or pharmacy, or even at your favorite corner store at your regular time, then you would at least have vouchsafed to speak on your behalf. This is just thinking. It's just that many people somewhat have question marks hanging over themselves. They're an unknown quanta. The more you'll associate with others in your life, the more vouchsafe you'll always have. See, you just don't compete well, and so you avoid the rat race, and maybe you would rather just be a constant online presence, and just let others measure themselves against the standard you set. Anyways, our initial dark and gloomy storm front has passed on through by now. But we have to take into consideration the mixture could precipitate, and could even form a cyclone, or severe hail, if certain conditions were met. Imagine if your car's windshield in your driveway was shattered by a baseball-sized hailstone. That's what the meteorologists are talking about. At any rate, I'm enjoying some newly acquired music. The time for me is good for that reason, but I couldn't imagine hearing hail of that size on our roof. Barometric pressure has everything to do with how and when any precipitation forms, as well as the temperature gradients between lower altitudes and higher altitudes. And I've already seen how the varying altitudes air masses sometimes move in contrary directions. So you see, meteorology is quite a science, one which I've always wanted to learn to understand. My latest audiobook chapter 1, of the Impromptu Profundity audiobook, is 37 minutes in length. So, this writing will begin the second chapter of this. I've just thrown away from hour-plus talking book chapters, because that's too much for most people's span of attention. Our useful attention span might be only 10 or 20 minutes in length at best, so I'm trying to keep things shorter. Just some thoughts. I'm finding in my living that the area and zephyrs around my ears and eyes, the layer of airs around my face and head, is almost completely yielding to the bitter, acrid, wrenching crosswinds of these times we're sometimes living in. My defenses, if weather is ever changing rapidly, for instance, or talk terrible, are quickly breached. Someone like myself will have things on his mind, as the linguistic fabric sounds so torn and traumatized. If you've been hurt 3 or more times in the same way, you begin to expect and look for the same hurt repeating. So, this is part of our predicament as content developers. Despite what we've seen and heard on our media appliances, we tend to continue walking in the best way we know how, despite most any risk. Everyone in the whole land, I think, is adamant about this one thing. You must go by the laws of the land, and you must never threaten or harm anyone or yourself. So, our society has to continually set forth deterrents, and the facts of the deterrents are designed to prevent any criminal actions from affecting anyone. The main reason I'm writing these thoughts down is, I would say, mainly because I'm trying to develop content. And so, I enjoy the production process enormously. Can't one keep his or her readers or listeners? Or will they walk away because your material is watered down? I would say, look at the latest chapter. To me it's quite interesting, and is full of useful observations and lessons. Even if you know my methodology, I think you'll still like to hear what is there in the latest file. So, anyway, an example I've used to somewhat get myself past the boredom patrol is how people enjoy the generative artificial intelligence type software, and seem to enjoy reading or publishing such produce. If they think that it's truly new, or novel, it's very similar with my writing. Its appeal is generally in its newness, even if it's much speaking about nothing. As long as it was written by a real mind, accessing real cognitive strata, by way of a spirit guidance, on the inside of their mind, then someone will want to read such. How much more so interesting, then, is my work, than a computer's output? I think a good amount. It's like the miracle of having a child. Anyone, even a dullard, can't tap into the human latency of procreation. Such is a power that we all carry within, unless we are barren, or sterile. But, if you make a baby, then God does the most important work, most definitely. With a woman and a man, God and our human genetics can gestate an embryo, in much the same manner as this essay is coming into existence. It's like driving a big tractor, with power steering. All it takes is a finger's effort. You can move a mountain. At any rate, these are just some thoughts. I'm honored and pleased to allow them to go onto my pages, and I'm thanking the benevolent spirits which bring them forth. I had a quick snack, and a thermos of tea brew, and tried to understand some of the funny things people will say. Why would something so silly and dumb make me upset? I guess that I don't want surprises from a small thing like a snap time. But people will say the unexpected thing. Sometimes, I'll be sensitive to, or puzzled by this, when I have only had an imagistic conflict, or disagreement. But someone couldn't stand the thought of my artwork, or of what had happened on the other side of the planet. So the problem is with me, and my overly sensitive, brittle emotions. How could I have allowed myself to get upset? But life carries on. I think that another lesson might be, death is no respecter of persons. We here could all blow away in a twister tonight. So any new development might and can face such resistance. Anyway, I'll wrap this writing up and send along your way now. All for now, Greg. Till then, starting in with some new writing this morning. I'm glad and relieved to have gotten up at an early hour and been able to work on this writing. This will be the second article in the second part of this new Impromptu Profundity audiobook. I start in with some jazz thinking and make my way down the page. I've thought many times before about how utterly pointless are the games of essentially base life, and how we should just abandon that sinking ship. When such false ways get so persecuted, it's not wise to practice hip-racy number, but one had better make the connection that only decency and self-respect and moderation have the power to withstand the self-criticism of a God who has entirely moved past the pursuits of base, sensual objectives, in favor of the pursuits of literary and artistic goals of equity and of its acquisition. Isn't this an individual journey, which every man makes at different times in his life? This rejecting of the base sensual in favor of spiritual creativity, and in favor of the acquiring of the passion for a real art. I can easily see how, at a time in our lives, we are so critical of the base, sensual pursuits, having individually walked away from such folly. I know it's hip-racy to speak in this way, but the pursuit of equity, and the making and keeping of something to show for the time, are values which are favored over that of the expending of sensual potentialities. You might conceive some of this in my writing, and art, and music. You should remember this lesson, then, and to keep in mind the difference between what things in this life are lasting and permanent, and what things in such life are transient and fleeting. You should remember this message, and especially remember the importance of keeping healthy balance in your life. I think that everyone has their own journey to take in the conquering of the illusions of sensuality. In my own life journey, there was my own share of this, and certain pursuits which had to run their course. I just can't pretend that I didn't chase the fantasy encountered, because I often did. The secret, I think, was in forgiving these rabbit chases, and quickly moving along into the good lessons of the spirit, as soon as the lower urges really leave you alone, and you're allowed to, at last, be spiritually pure. Why do some men get dragged through this? Maybe the sense of contentment which sometimes comes from chasing down the sexual urges is like a glue, which may well have a bonding effect on the haphazard paths of undisciplined living. But such will always tend to run its course in due time. But just who is it who is in charge of who to love, and of how much? Since there isn't a really good answer for this question, we just try to remember to practice the virtues. Especially, it might be helpful to remember to be tolerant, no matter the evil. Maybe by this way we'll save mankind. I think that your soul and spirit should be able to spot when a practice is decrepit, and poor people's self-esteem is being eroded in the mindless pursuit of release and sensual satisfaction. This is hypocrisy, but once you have been placed on a path of spiritual cultivation and mindfulness, in the building of real equity, you should never intentionally relax into sensual shame and guilt. A spiritual mind is just too precious a thing to mindlessly subject such undevious to end results. I myself think that we should order our lives around the building of such equity, and the meaningful compiling and management of properties of the intellectual kind, and avoid at all costs that which appears to be grief and agony. But who can say? Maybe we should make ourselves holy as soon as we can mentally grasp the clear advantages of that way. At any rate, these are some thoughts. We should practice compassion, understanding, and forgiveness. If a thing still doesn't seem to fit, if shown these criteria, then such might have more in common with loss, and only amount to grief and agony. These are my best thoughts on the topic. Not so as to practice hypocrisy, but so as to look into the matters of the need for righteousness in our society. Life is senseless enough already. We should emphasize purity, and practice the mindfulness which appears to be in harmony with such purity. These are my best thoughts on the matter. At any rate, today is the second Tuesday in June, this year. I have awoke early, and have written these thoughts down, mainly because I think that they will make for interesting content in this new Impromptu Profundity audiobook. There may not ever be any ultimate answer in the progressive music field. Who could say? But, especially, I enjoy working the issues out of this writing, and giving myself an intelligent article for the second piece in part 2. Well, we here have some morning clouds and haziness, and the humidity and dampness outside is pronounced. The sun should be out by around 11 this morning. Today is the second Tuesday in June, this year. I think that our area is expecting rain again around Thursday of this week. We'll have some sun until then. Partly sunny, then. Well, I finished some chores this morning to get a few things off of my mind, so now the day is brighter and happier. You have got to sweep and mop up the human dander, which collects on surfaces such as the floor and tabletops. Certain bugs will feed on this human dander, and are sometimes nearly impossible to get rid of. So, it's best not to give them any environment that they would be attracted to, but to keep floors and surfaces swept and mopped. Well, when I sit down and brainstorm around collecting some good ideas to include in an essay for a book of such essays, then I really feel that I'm in my element, and am doing what I was meant to do for all of my life. This is part of the enormous appeal of this kind of channeled writing. Such really is like driving a large tractor using only your fingertip control. When I think about the music that has meant the most to me in my life, I think that this would also include the stream of consciousness types of playing. But, as As a child and teenager in the 1980s, I lacked the vision of the spiritual latticework, which I feel would have allowed me a picture of the spontaneously generated and arrived upon performing style for music. So, lacking in this way, I was drawn toward the formal and music, the classical composers, who wrote their hearts out. My world, well, the world that I inhabited at the time, went only by that, and I never knew any different. That is, until I was given the staff of 45 RPM records from a distant relative's diner's jukebox. These included a sampling of 50s and 60s artists, mainly from R&B, country, and rock and roll. I was shown some of the work of film composers from that time which my parents had by their high-fidelity player. Some of these artists composed spontaneously into their recording device, and let the music be a kind of end product and spin-off of the ever-changing now. That music was inseparable from the late 70s and early 80s for myself. Classical and electronic film composers whose works seemed to encapsulate the sweep and grandeur of the age at the time in my young mind, and the science fiction subtext that some of that music was paired with somewhat told everyone to look ahead, because the future, our future, was on its way. I listened to my parents' records exhaustively as well. But it was my best friend who reintroduced me to the electrified rock music sounds of the 50s and 60s. My 45 RPM record collection, he said, had overlooked some important artists. So, these became my teachers and guides. There were a few other important influences as well. My usage of sacraments, at the time, somewhat kept my mind immersed in this good music. But at any rate, I've spoken of most of my musical influences from my youth in my post-PM note, and now I have here as well. I hope you see how my eventual life path, these works you can find on these pages, wouldn't have come to be without my being so exposed to these other great musicians. At any rate, these ideas are starting to come to their conclusion now, so I'll think about wrapping this article up and adding it in with the others. Now, all for now. Greg. Today is the second Wednesday in June this year. Our weather this morning is beautiful and sunny. The time is 6:30 a.m. and I feel woken and taken care of hygiene, and will try to start some new writing. I've come in the bedroom from the kitchen, where the rabbits were looking in at me through the sliding glass doors. They weren't nibbling kudzu and looking in at me curiously. I'm listening to an optical disc playing softly on my handheld device. With this writing piece started, I'll somewhat have a focus of attention throughout the morning. This is the main consideration, as it's generally good to have some work started on a work day like today. My mind can be taken back to this word processor anytime ideas arise across my day. I truly think that I was made to be a writer. At the end of the day, I have to hope for the best. My mental illness diagnosis is such that my paranoid beliefs about things and goings on in my world directly influence and shape the world that I experience. I've lived with this type of mental illness for a long time. On a day like today is a Wednesday, I just have to understand that this is a work day in the middle of the work week. This place where I live is not a leisure playhouse. It's a place where I stay on the clock, around the clock. I generally get only 1 or 2 days rest a week, and that will usually be Friday or Saturday. But I will be working on something at any given time. The time here isn't always very good. It seems like most days here are weather days. I saw on this morning's news here that we can expect the chance of thunderstorms and rain for the next 5 days at least. We have to do our best, whether the day's news is good or bad. Speaking for myself, I'm feeling the strain right now. My hope is that sometime this afternoon we'll be over the hurdle of the middle week, and the walking will get somewhat easier. Those of us who do feel the strain these days, and still are given the purpose of work, like writing or painting, are allowed to have coffee and tea brews. This, and the audio-video that I have going constantly are my only reprieve. I enjoy visits from my parents. They are aging, but can still come to see me. At any rate, yesterday was Tuesday, and I helped a lot with housework, sweeping and mopping most of the living area. My mind is a no-boundaries affair. Yesterday it had been a full week since an episode of sudden unexpected deuce pain, when my mind felt like I got devastated from above. With over 300 unique download web pages, my psychic troubles sometimes come at me without warning, in unexpected ways. But, on a clear day you can see forever, as the song goes, so I guess you've got to take the bad with the good. Anyways, even if I'm given poor weather I can't come up with something that I'll want to look at. I learned a long time ago that I like listening back to recently made recordings of myself on piano. So, because of this kind of blessing, I've grown to the place where I can build equity at most any given time. With extensive knowledge of how audio can be made to work with visual images and video, I'll start from zero, just nothing, and really have the best time of my life. And I'll then have something to show for the time spent. At any rate, this is the only game plan that I've gone by for 25 years. This, and staying on my medicine, and keeping my hygiene and housework up, have been the best I could desire. Anyways, from this place on my bed, in this room, I can't see through the window across over the adjacent house the pine trees along the west, and see the fading light of this day's sun. I think that we had a chance of some rain today, but never received any. Our weather will probably be this same way throughout the rest of the week. Each day seeing about a 50-50 chance of rain and winds. The time is early in this morning, Thursday, and I slept and gotten up at around 2 a.m. Now is a good time to try some writing, I tell myself. There is a diesel locomotive going by, idling, on the tracks near here, and this drone seems to fill the night. I sit here, inputting into this word processor, and I imagine reaching my hands and arms up past the sides of my face and head, cradling myself snugly. The spaces about myself, as I sit here on this bed, seem alive with tiny sounds. Especially the spaces outside my ears seem to sing and ring. I've always thought that empty space, the vacuum, the interstellar void, is nearby, and is a sentient presence. But, myself sitting here, this is the Earth's biosphere which my mind is interacting with. I'm down inside of the soul of the Earth, snugly cradled here in this small room, in this apartment, here on the land. I wouldn't last long in a vacuum. At least, this is what my mind shows to me. I continue writing in this journal, as my morning gets along today. I'm looking forward to my parents driving down today, and will give Dad his Father's Day gifts. This will definitely be the high point of my week. I've gotten some cleaning accomplished, and straightened up inside, and can't now rest and wait on my folks. At any rate, this piece presently seems to read alright, and is at around 8 pages in length. I usually try to make my essays be 10 pages or better. 12 is my average length. Well, the day today has gotten along. My folks got safely back home, and I have gotten my evening medicines, and retired back to my apartment for the night. I would say that my ideal pastime these days is playing instrumental music CDs on my handheld player, while following the train of thought into my word processor, and closely examining the thoughts that arise, to discern quite what is on my mind, from moment to moment, in the composing of an essay of new writing. This type of exercise is definitely my ideal pastime, and I like to return to this way anytime I can. I don't know which is my preferred way, whether writing in this way, and being in this communion with my higher spirit, or listening back to my finished product. The communion like this is so blessed, and I would say that a person can't be any more alive and experientially engaged than in the gentle arms of a good angel in this way. There is no higher path. Such must be the culmination, the crowning achievement of this life on earth. I can't think of anything, anyway, to be any more alive, and in the now, in the present, and in the communion with his or her beloved, than in this existential dancing, and interrelating with one spirit. Well, these have been just a few thoughts. The time is 5:30 p.m. on this Friday morning, today. I've gotten up early, and bathed, and had a bite to eat, and am just going to finish this article, and get over to our office, for my medicine. This article has taken 3 days to write, and I am at last finishing it up. I'll wrap these thoughts up, and add them in with the others, and send along your way now. All for now, Greg. Tilda. When I was a teenager, around the end of the 1980s, I was a bit of a mess. I was introduced to, and thought I needed the sacraments of the psychoactive entheogens and chemicals. Those substances gave unto me a glimpse into the mind of the future me. I had previously had no idea that was the amazing sense that flying would later become a regular part of each day. So this was music. But this was a big problem for myself at age 18, because those substances, some of them, were illegal. So my foundational legacy was fractured in those days. I would make poor choices, and more than once I found myself in trouble. That's what happens when you break controlled substances laws. But I was in the arms of my angel. She had me in her cradling. Or so it appeared. Somehow I stayed out of trouble. 5 years after my high school graduation, I was given consciousness of some of the presences invisibly within myself. But until then, the only thing I had was a path of art, looking at others' art, and trying to make my own. At a point, the space music program on my public radio station introduced me to improvisational keyboard music, and the power of slow, ambient, or spacey music. And the beginning of a plan came into view. My sketching and painting gradually grew more sophisticated, as well. Everything else in my life was a gradual way of doing as much art as I could. Under the influence of the sacraments, as I spoke of, and my piano improvisations eventually got me focused on the flowing of time, and I began thinking more about, and noticing the space that filled it. My experience of this time and space began to come to a fullness, but I had to meet the spirit guides and presences, and this meant that there were dues to pay. So my experience was made painful with a thorn in my side. What had previously come easily, the passage of time, was now difficult, and I felt I had to self-medicate this difficult, agitated pain. But, after 5 years of feeling this bad way, short poems began coming to me, appearing to move my hand, and write themselves out by a higher power. I gradually recollected my typing ability, and since I had a computer, this was used to store and file my pieces. This state had persisted for 7 years, and I would have done anything to escape the foreboding and dread experienced as a wrenching restless pain and discontentment in my lower extremities. So, in early 1998, following a serious suicide attempt, my peace was restored, and I found myself in a pain-free state. You could imagine my joy. I wanted to write and play music, and be alive in the new sense of bliss and freedom. I knew that eventually I would be a prolific artist myself, and I began acting accordingly. I gradually built a literary legacy. So, what you can see here isn't just a cookie-cutter writing style. Such was hard won. At any rate, today is the second Saturday in June, this year. I'm enjoying getting these thoughts down into this word processor memory, and seeing how I can finish this article. I think that it will be good if I'm shown a lot of ideas, and if I can continue getting them into writing, like this. I think that this present will be an ideal time for getting any such creative work done. For arriving upon, and coming to agreement of just who and what we can be. After a traumatizing event, part of what we're left with are some difficult memories. I think that we can feel and experience some of the painful memories and loss that others have been through, as a virtual sense of temporality and transient in our lives. This is only natural, and comes from the hearts who were uprooted, and forced to walk on past their lives. The measure of our own lives, I feel, comes as we take the sense of trauma and loss, and turn it into something good and helpful. This is the lemons in 2 lemonade plan. Anytime something unpleasant happens to good people, we only want to show forth our own strength in being flexible, as such people relive the memories of what they have been through. When we can be sturdy, stable guides and companions, as some people relocate their peaceful, pleasant songs in their own inner hearts, then we will have demonstrated our fidelity. People whose lives lack organization, and the blessings of a sense of structure, like the mental health patients, just need some help in these 2 areas. I myself am blessed that the good Lord has worked carefully in my life for 20 years or longer, as a conscious partner, to lift my life into a higher wavelength frequency. So, what you can see here is something like a homecoming dance to affirm the spiritual balance in my own life, and in the lives of others, and to encourage others to work along on their own paths and journeys toward remembering the limitless potentialities contained within any good, helpful spirit's presence. Some people will have gone home to their ancestral promises, and others will be survivors and must continue trying to solve spirits' puzzles and enigmas down here on earth. It's a great blessing to have some of my own life to share, and maybe just by myself acknowledging, yes, I had to see that, and I'll never forget what I saw. But there must be hope despite it, and new meanings to locate, new relationships to keep. No mortal can really judge others. Such, I think, always requires both higher ascended and lower conscience, knowing the law, and death is no respecter of persons. We all have to try and do anything we can do as opportunity presents itself. At any rate, these are some ideas this morning. The time here is around 10:30 a.m., and I've just had a cup of iced instant coffee, and in a few minutes, I'll have some corn chips, and look back at this writing's progress. If you feel a thing, won't you then speak or write of it? I think that writers see pictures in their minds and physical body, and then strive to get down into words the particular nuances of the pictures. I'm grateful to be blessed with some peaceful pictures this morning, as our relationships here are in the clear, and our time is secured. This is such a pleasant little hilltop at Clay, and our happiness, I feel, confirms and affirms our best hopes for a decent future. I think that we're looking toward the coming autumn seasonal times, and the start of another year in our minds. And in truth, I think that I for one will be happily busy in dreaming the new year in, as I will be writing or producing at most any time of any week. I don't expect this to change, but I could if I had to. Every good thing has come through as we had hoped it would, and any mental illness or attachment to suffering which I deal with in my life will not be so distracting that anyone loses sight of their good grip on reality. What we really have to do is rest knowing that when our earthly candle flame goes out, the one in heaven only shines brighter. Mental illness, or cancer, or bodily decay then can't affect it. So, this is a pretty good promise, if you ask me, and I'm happy and proud to have been shown it. We will have gotten past our fears of a Wizard of Oz-type God concept. We might well believe in the loving, caring Father who only wants the all-around best for their offspring. And it's good to wholly believe that this is and will be true. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the world. Anyways, I tend to measure a lot by how strong and peaceful my music sounds now. This is because music travels on the air and conveys anything it picks up thereupon to our eardrum. The better, more reassuring sound has more promise for the future. I know that sound is very meaningful to us as people. It should be so sweet and have continuance. If a particular sound appears broken, then it gets squared away in the past and needn't ever repeat itself. Isn't this the same way as the church's story? We'll never have to face crucifixion again, paid in full. There are many ways to see. At least these are some of my own. Well, I'll see about wrapping this article up and adding it in with the others. All for now, Greg. Till then, as I sit to jot some thoughts down, this second Saturday evening in June, this year, I'm feeling rested, and now at 6 p.m. here I'm somewhat wishing to examine some of the thinking which almost always bothers myself. This is a free country, where I live, so there is no right or wrong way to think. I don't care who you are. Back in 2002, I found a book called The Journey of Art. Our beliefs about our world determine our experiences of that world. My mind is somewhat susceptible to paranoid self-criticism. This isn't so bad, except for when I fall for an illusional notion and develop a false belief. I was shown a checklist which I still think of sometimes, covering the ways that bad behavior often starts with something you wouldn't think much about. Emotions. Such pointed out how a whole range of negative phenomena come from something simple. Mere emotions. Here's the checklist, showing the progression from innocuous, simple things to the worst of actions and behaviors. I'll never forget it. 1. Emotions. 2. Thoughts. 3. Feelings. 4. Beliefs. 5. Attitudes. And lastly, 6. Behaviors. Just put bad in front of these 6 things, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. You see, simple, strong emotions, thoughts, and feelings can lead to wrong beliefs, attitudes, and worst, bad behaviors. You see, the journey of art is a very real journey, indeed. This is especially true when you understand how many people in our world have and experience bipolar symptoms. You know how bipolar symptoms are, don't you? You know how when we feel good and things are going well, we're the perfect example of enlightened leadership. Then there will be this reversal of this enlightened state collapsing back upon itself and tending to consume the self into erosive paranoia, which can definitely lead to the 6 ranges of phenomena spoken of above. Strong emotions, in some people, cause stinking thinking. This stinking thinking directly creates bad feelings within a person. Then, the last 3, enough bad feelings, and the human mind gives into a bad belief in some way. Bad beliefs are so taboo that I'm reluctant to mention much about. A bad belief may be the false thought or assumption that someone is out to get me. When you haven't done anything to them, why would they want to get at you? A bad belief about the world can directly influence and affect our experience of that world. This tends to cause in someone a bad attitude to form, and this kind of thing would definitely make everyone stare at them and wonder what they'll do or say next. That, you see, would be a bad behavior. So, this I've covered shows you how simple strong emotions almost always cause stinking thinking in some people. So, and this type of thinking makes the self feel very bad very quickly. So, you see how even bad behaviors sometimes will come from simple strong emotions. This isn't a checklist. It's more of a list of the stages we tend to go through when we tend to be bipolar, with the enlightened state at the top, and then, when our mind's polarity reverses, we tend to be self-critical to the point of paranoia, and this can even cause delusional thinking patterns, such as the false belief that people are after me. At any rate, I've shown you this list of stages, and how this sometimes can be seen in borderline people who live with occasional bipolar symptoms, and do have to navigate these areas. Here's where I get back to the journey of art. You see, finding a book like this, for myself, back in 2002, was a godsend. Such spoke to this effect. This tendency, in the arts, and of artists, to fall into false, but compelling beliefs about the self, such as the false notion that I changed the sunlight, or in some way caused a massive problem. You see, truer than this, is that no one noticed, and to your feeling an invisible weight of importance of guilt, or false sense of causality, which might just as well entirely lift off of yourself, and you would feel a great spring in your steps, and you wouldn't even be able to say what had gotten you down, and the world's ongoings and activities would continue completely unaffected, no matter you were feeling weighed down or not. The people of the world don't care how you feel. Once a person gets a glimpse of this light and weightless state, you'll remember and know how pointless is letting your heaviness really influence your beliefs or behaviors at all. You'll then tend to be relieved of the false belief that I did it, or that I'm guilty in some way. The journey of art is something that many people will be going through concurrently in a vast, diverse society where everyone and anyone is the director and or the producer and or the principal artist in the production. Because in a world such as this one, many people will experience bipolar mood swings, not just one. The reason for this, of course, is that everyone is the artist now. So, in this bipolar type of personal makeup, you'll want to remember this 6-stage checklist, and how important it is to somewhat keep strong emotions in check. These have just been some thoughts to conclude part 2 of this Impromptu Profundity, Pathways of Spirit, audiobook. Well, I'll send these ideas along your way. Now, all for now, Greg.